Well, hello again, and welcome to the end of our first week, which was generally just getting familiar with the online format and how to access the content and where to post questions. And in reply to the assignments, I'm going to go over a quick little PowerPoint presentation about surveys and Bible studies. And as mentioned in the MP3, for today's lesson, or for this week's lesson, we talked about different types of surveys, like from space or the plane, and we're going to just dive in a little deeper with that right now. So, if we're looking at a space picture of Florida, we can see a general overview of the entire state. It's basically we can see everything at a glance. It's an instant. Then if we were going to ride in a plane around Florida, we'll still see the entire state, but we're closer to the ground and we can see more detail, but it's still an overview. We're still kind of looking over at the there's Tampa, there's Miami. It might take us a little longer than this snapshot, but we can still see this entire state with more detail. It just takes a little bit longer to get through. So those are types of surveys. And a survey is a careful observation of how a large section, and typically in Bible studies you're looking at maybe a chapter, how that's organized and how it relates to the other chapters. Now you can observe the structure of the passage. There's you can do an outline, a chart, and you try to form some logical relationship that binds the material together. And it helps us to assess the larger text on what we should pay attention to. And an example of a survey of Matthew. Here's a survey of Matthew, what Matthew might look like. This is provided by Dr. Russell he's the Dean of Asbury Theological Seminary. And he's got Matthew divided into 3 sections. So at a glance, we can see the entire book of Matthew outlined. That's a survey. So there's also more detailed studies that are involved when we're talking about the Bible. And from the MP3 example, I talked about a helicopter ride or a trolley ride. Now think about this in terms of seeing St. Augustine. And these are all both pictures of St. Augustine. So we're not necessarily looking at the entire state of Florida from space or from plane. We're kind of zeroing in on a specific area of Florida. So like with Dr. Matthew's survey of Matthew, it's kind of like a helicopter ride over St. Augustine. We can see different parts of St. Augustine. If St. Augustine is part of Florida, like Matthew is a part of the Bible, St. Augustine has different details that we can see. Now we could also take the trolley ride and ride around and see more specific details, maybe more detailed than the helicopter because we're closer to the actual fort. There's the fort from space, not space, but helicopter. And then there's the fort from the trolley. So when we're dealing with a book study, they provide a more detailed observation. Now, detailed observations can be defined as careful and systematic set of observations about a limited or small number of verses. And it's comprehensive in scope. What do we see? What do we see that's there in the text? And then you would raise questions that lead to a deeper understanding of the text. These are very typical of book studies, kind of like the helicopter ride and the trolley ride. But we can get even more detailed than that. Detailed book studies we can get off the trolley and we could walk around. We can actually see the different shops. It's more detailed. Now, it takes more time. If we were to walk St. Augustine versus ride around in a helicopter or ride around in a trolley, We can walk around. Well, one could walk around St. Augustine. I don't know if I could, especially in this heat. But we could walk around St. Augustine and get a more detailed look of St. Augustine. Or we can dig deep. And they do this often. This is actually a picture of UNF doing an archaeological dig where we can actually concentrate on one parcel of land. And that can be done in a Bible study as well, where we're walking around, getting a feel for the people, their culture, and then we can dig into maybe like the language and word studies and what that means. So detailed book studies include major literary structural relationships. So if you're familiar with like in English literature, these are very common terms. Recurrence, with something that's repeating over and over again. There's a contrast. They might use comparison in the writings, causation, substantiation, instrumentation, introduction. Not necessarily the introduction of the book or the letter, but somewhere in the text they're preparing you for something, and then it's revealed later on. Pivot, climax. Where's the climax of the story? Where's the climax of Matthew? Is it when he died and was resurrected? Interrogation. There's sometimes you'll see there's a problem that's being presented, and then later on there's a solution. Particularization, which is very detailed, and generalization, which is generalizing, and then summaries. These are all literary literary structural relationships of Scripture. And then we want to take in consideration a socio-rhetorical criticism. That's basically an analysis and interpretation that is based on both oral and literary dynamics within that social, cultural, and ideological and religious context. What are they thinking as an ancient Near Eastern person? How do they think as a first century Jew, etc., etc.? You also want to take in consideration for geography, history, language studies, and of course word study, which we talked about that before. So in other words, Bible surveys and book studies can go from something very general to very specific, and even very, very specific. So do you know the saying, have you heard the saying, you can't see the forest for the trees? Well, in Bible surveys and Bible studies, we want to look at the forest and the trees, and maybe even more than that, depending on how deep you want to dig. So if you look at it like this is something from very general to very specific. We have a forest. We can see the forest. We can see how pretty the forest is. Then we can look at a very specific area of the forest, this area of trees. Then we can look at this tree in particular. We can also look at the leaf. And we can also look at the molecular structure of a tree. So, as we approach this Bible survey, what can we be on the lookout for? What are we, because we're kind of getting snapshots here. What can we be on the lookout for? Because we're looking at the entire Bible over 8 weeks. The entire Bible. So it's more of like an airplane ride. We're going to ride around Florida for a whole 8 weeks and look at different areas. So what can we look at? What can we look for when we're looking at this? Well, in a survey, we want to look at some specific materials. We're going to go over that. We're going to go over the people, the places, the time periods, the geography, the main units and subunits. This is a great study, and they've already broken that down for us. We're not going to really go into structural relationships and interpretive questions because, again, we're not digging in too deep or necessarily. Well, but we might be looking at strategic areas, like what part of the Bible is very, very important. He does get into a literary form a little bit about how they're structured, how the different books of the Bible are structured. I don't know if there's too much atmosphere or not, but that's kind of what we want to look at. We want to look at different things to help augment our experience. Now, tomorrow I will be unlocking more content, and there's going to be a content tab, and then there'll be a question and answer tab as well. And there was a question on whether or not it was required to participate fully. No, obviously not. If you don't want to answer the questions, that's fine. If you don't want to respond to anyone else, that's fine too. I would encourage it though, because we are not islands. So we're in this together, and even though we can't meet in real life, I'm trying to encourage us to be in fellowship and be on this journey together. So from our plane ride, when we're all in this together, and we can share our experiences and we can learn from everybody else's perspective. Well, I hope this was helpful, and I hope you enjoy the ride, and I'll see you on the virtual. God bless.